Hi, and welcome to the class for the Pfaff QE720. This is one of my favorite machines. It's really close to my heart, so you're going to enjoy this class. I'm going to take you completely through the machine. We're going to go over every button, every feature, every function of the machine. We're not going to spend a ton of time on threading, although I am going to show you just quickly how to thread the machine, but really it's about the nuts and bolts of this machine. So let's get started. First thing is I want to point out what I call the obvious features of the machine. The machine is 10 inches long, so it's a very big machine, so you got lots of working room here. So we call these long arm machines, even though all the machines in the industry are getting kind of bigger to accommodate quilters mainly, so they can get the larger pieces of fabric in there. It has, of course, Pfaff's built-in walking foot, which is a very, very important feature to most quilters, is to have the walking foot integrated into the machine. What this actually is, if you're not familiar with Pfaff, is you're adding an extra set of feed teeth to the top of the fabric. So what happens on sewing machines, and all sewing machines do this, is you line up your two pieces of fabric and then you start to sew your seam. And by the time the seam's done, instead of the fabrics being lined up, they look a little bit more like this. The bottom one slid a little bit more than the top. And it's because sewing machines have feed teeth on the bottom, so they're only feeding on the bottom, so the bottom piece of fabric moves slightly faster than the top piece of fabric. Well, 40 years ago, Pfaff solved this problem, and that's why people are so loyal to Pfaff, is they integrated an upper feed system, so they put an extra set of feed teeth on the top of the fabric. So instead of feeding like this, Pfaff actually feeds like this, from the top and the bottom at the exact same time, pulling the fabric through evenly. So that is one of the biggest features with Pfaff. But so that's on the machine. We've got LED lighting, touch screen. It's a fantastic machine. So let's get into the nuts and bolts. Okay, so we're going to start by putting our thread on our spool pin, which does stand up or lays down. You want it down because you really want the thread to be horizontally so that the thread just falls off the spool. You got your first guide here to the button guide here, then down the front of the machine. Let me change the view. So we go right down the first groove, back up to the top. Around the take-up lever, there's a metal lever in there that moves up and down that the thread gets clicked into. Down, we got a little catch right at the needle clamp, and then of course we have the automatic needle threader, which is going to pull the thread right through the eye of the needle. So now the top thread is threaded really fast and easy. It's a drop-in bobbin system, so loading the bobbin is very easy. The machine does come with specially designed bobbins, really cool. They only fit in the machine the proper way, so you can't put them in upside down. The machine also works with pre-wound bobbins, and that's what I'm going to use today, which is an L-class pre-wound bobbin from Filtech. So then I drop it in, pull it into the little catch right here, and you'll hear it kind of click in, bring it around, and you cut it off like that, and now the bobbin is done. Really easy. So I'm going to talk very quickly about the physical buttons on the front of the machine that's next to the touch screen. I'll go over what each button does, and then I'll actually show it to you in action. So these are the presser foot lifter buttons. They raise and lower the presser foot. We have the pattern restart button. If you're doing, say, a little heart pattern, and you hit this button, it takes you back to the beginning. This is an automatic locking feature, so you don't have to reverse back and forth on the stitch at the beginning and end. This is your start-stop button to sew without your foot control. This is your speed control to turn the speed up and down on the machine. This is needle up and down feature. This is your automatic thread cutter, and down here is your reverse. So now I'll show you these buttons in action. Okay, so now I'm going to show you some of these buttons in action. So the first one I want to talk about is the presser foot up and down button. So seems obvious on what it does, but each button has two touches. So when you push the presser foot down button, of course the presser foot drops down against the fabric like it's going to sew. Now if you hit this button a second time, the foot bounces up just a tiny amount, and so this is where, when you had a lifter lever, you maybe would raise and lower the lever to position the needle right where you want to start sewing. Instead, you hit the little hover button, you move the machine right where you want to start sewing, and then when you hit the foot control, it'll drop down the rest of the way, and then you're off and stitching. So then you also have the presser foot up button, which is going to raise the presser foot. Now if you hit the presser foot up button a second time, the presser foot goes to this extra high position. So this is really far up there, so you don't have to crank on a lifter lever anymore to get a fat piece of fabric underneath there. And I don't know if you've heard it on the film, but the feed dogs dropped. It made an extra little thud sound. That was the feed dogs disengaging. And so this is so that you can slide a really fat piece of fabric and not have it get caught on the feed dogs and get it underneath the presser foot. Now, as soon as you start sewing though, those feed dogs will instantly re-engage. So as soon as I hit the foot control, you'll hear them click back in, and now the feed dogs are active again. So that's the presser foot up and down button. So again, each button has 2 touches. The next button I want to talk about is the start stop button. So this is where you can start sewing without using your foot control, just by hitting this button here. Now if you hit the button, the machine's just going to run off at its top speed, which is extremely fast on this model. It's a very fast machine. So you can dial it down with the other button here that kind of looks like a funny little triangle. So if you hold that button down now on the screen, you get this little slider, and you can put the speed wherever you want or wherever you're comfortable at. Now when I hit that button, the machine doesn't race off on me. This is also nice for when you're doing free motion quilting, because you can set the speed exactly where you want it. Then you can hit the start button, and then you can start doing your free motion, which I'll show you a little bit later. And the cool thing with this, the way that this button works, is you do not have to unplug the foot control like you do on other model machines. So you can leave the foot control plugged in, but when you start sewing with the start stop button, anytime I touch the foot control instantly takes back over. So this again is another really nice feature for free motion quilting, because you can hit start, you can do your free motion quilting, and instead of having to reach back for the button to stop it, if you just take your foot and tap on the foot control, it'll stop the machine because the foot control just took back over. So that's the start stop button. Now next to that we have a little pair of scissors. That's the cut. So when you get to the end of the seam, you hit the cut. It is going to cut the thread, top and bottom, and it's going to raise the presser foot at the same time. So it does it all in one action. You don't have to program that. You don't have to dial it in. You just hit the cutter and it's automatically going to do that. So that's, again, a really nice way that Pfaff does their scissors, which is different than other machines. Other machines, even if you have an automatic foot lift, you have to hit the cutter, you have to hit the foot lift, but you have to do all these other things. Pfaff just does it in one single motion, which is nice. The cutter actually works another way too. When you're sewing a pattern, if you're sewing a pattern and the needle is actively moving and you hit the cutter, it's going to wait till the pattern is done before it cuts and lifts the foot. So if you're doing like a heart and you are sewing the heart, you hit the cutter, it'll wait till the heart's finished and then it'll cut. Now, anytime you're sewing and you stop sewing and you hit the cutter, then it instantly cuts. So if you're doing that same heart pattern and you stopped right in the middle of the heart, hit the cutter, again, it'll just cut right then and there and it won't finish the pattern. So it only finishes the pattern as you're sewing. So the needle up down is the other important one above it. Of course, quilters, this is a really important feature to quilters, having the needle up down feature. But the needle up down feature on a Pfaff is kind of special, I would say. So when I hit and activate the needle down, one is you'll see an LED light turn on below the button just to let you know that that button is active. So now when I start sewing, of course it's going to stop with the needle down, but you'll notice the presser foot pivots up. So you don't have to program this in. It's not a number of steps. It's going to take care of that automatically for you. So it's going to pivot up so you can turn really nice and easy. Really great for quilters too, because you can do chain piecing really easy. You can sew off your fabric, and then you can slide your next piece of fabric in, and you can do it all without having to reach for levers or program anything. So now I slide my next piece in and keep going. So that's the needle up down feature. But let me talk really quick, since we're on the needle up down, how cool the foot control is on this machine. So I just turned off the needle up down. So the foot control has a tap feature. So if I am sewing normal with my needle stopping in the up position and my presser foot down, if I need to turn a corner really quick, instead of reaching for that button, all I have to do is give my foot control a short tap with my foot, which is going to put the needle down and pivot the foot up automatically. So again, I'm doing this just by tapping my foot control. So that's a hidden little gem that the machine does. Next to it is just an automatic locking feature. So if I'm sewing and I hit this button, it's going to lock my stitch for me automatically. So you can see that in action. The fabric went back and forth and locked it up. The pattern restart takes you back to the beginning of the pattern. I don't have to sew that out. And then we talked about the speed already. So let's go and start doing some fun stuff on the touchscreen. So this is Pfaff's touchscreen. It's a very well-designed touchscreen. It's really easy to understand. It's easy to navigate. It's really nice how you interact with the machine, and I think that's very important. There's some machines you sit down in front of them and you look at their screen and you don't have a clue what the icons mean. You struggle with trying to get through their menus. Pfaff tries to make everything very simple and very easy, a lot like maybe using an iPhone. You know, you can kind of pick it up and it's a little bit intuitive. So that's what Pfaff's going with, intuitive. But the machine has so many wonderful features built into this simple little screen here, and I'm going to take you through all of them. On the side of the machine is a stylus holder, so you can use your finger on the screen if you want, but if you want to keep your screen nice and clean and crisp, then use the stylus. It just snaps right into the side of the machine underneath the hand wheel. So we're going to use the stylus. So I'm going to talk about this display. We're going to go through all of the different menus, all the features and functions. When you turn on the machine will automatically turn on to a straight stitch. So doesn't matter what stitch you were doing last, it's going to go default back to a regular straight stitch. So that's what's on the screen right now. So this first one is going to be needle positions. And you will see that on the screen, the straight stitch is moving either to the right or the left, and you'll kind of hear little clicks. That's actually the needle moving over. This area here represents the sewing area of the machine. So this machine, Pfaff, has a 9mm stitch width, so they're wider than a lot of machines in the industry, so their needle will move very far side to side. So that also gives you a lot of room to move the needle side to side. So this is great. You can move it over for a nice 1/4 inch stitch. If you're doing some bindings, a little bit easier. If you're doing like cording, you can get the needle put exactly where you want, or if you're installing a zipper, it's really, really fantastic. So this is needle positions here. This right here is going to be stitch length. And again, you're going to see the changes on the screen. You'll see the stitch get longer as I elongate the stitch. Now, the nice thing to know about Pfaff also is their max stitch length is 6mm long. Compare that to other machines in industry. They are not 6mm long. So the reason why that's so nice, one is you can do a really nice long stitch if you need to do that. Commercial machines do 6mm length, so you're getting kind of into more of that aspect. So really long. But Pfaff is also 9mm wide, 6mm long. So when you're doing decorative stitches that Pfaff offers, they are beautiful because they're big and they're bold because it can feed longer than most machines and is wider than most machines. So having that really long stitch length actually is quite nice on the decorative stitches. And again, you're seeing the changes active on the screen. And you'll notice too, when I make changes to any of the settings, it turns green. It lets you know, look, you changed that. That's off of its default. So over here next to it, the 4.6 number, that's tensions. The machine has electronically controlled tensions. So it's going to set the tensions itself for the different stitches you do. It sets it for when you're doing free motion quilting. It sets it when you're doing a 1/4 inch stitch. It's constantly adjusting for buttonholes. So that's what this number is. It's the default of the tensions for a straight stitch. Now, if you decide you want to change it, because maybe you're working with a specialty thread, then you can make the changes there. And you don't have to worry about playing with your tensions on this machine because you're not making permanent changes. So again, as soon as you turn the machine off, turn it back on, the tensions go back to normal. As soon as you leave this stitch and go to a different stitch, the tension goes back to its normal default. So people get scared about playing with tensions that they're going to mess up their machine. You don't have to worry about that at all. I'm going to get into what all of these little icons are on the side, but first let's show you how you can get to your sewing stitches. You have a little menu icon over here right to the left of the lit up display, and it is part of the touch panel. So if you touch that menu, it pops up with menus of stitches. So the first one it's going to go to is kind of your utility menu, your menu 1. This is where all of your basic stitches are, like zigzag. So when you select a stitch, the menu goes away and the zigzag shows up on the screen. So again, with the zigzag, now the first plus and minus, instead of being needle positions like it was when it was a straight stitch, it is now your stitch width. And you're seeing the changes active on the screen, which is important. I really like that Pfaff has that feature built into the machine that when you adjust the stitch, you actually see it on the display being adjusted, because a lot of other machines actually don't do this. They just give you a generic picture of the stitch and that's how it looks. Doesn't matter what changes you make to it. So here you get to actually see it. Now, an important thing to know also, and I'll show you a little bit about this later when we're doing some decorative stitches, is this, what you see on this screen is the actual size it stitches on the fabric. So you will know exactly how big your stitch is going to be because this is real sizing. So that, again, is a very, very strong feature that Pfaff has. Now I'll show you another little hidden feature. So this right here, this plus and minus, is adjusting the stitch width of our stitch. And we're doing a zigzag stitch, right? And that's basically getting wider from the middle out. Now, if I needed to reposition this stitch, in years past, you couldn't do this. I couldn't take this zigzag stitch and say I wanted it to be 3 clicks over to the right. But now you can. So if you notice, this little zigzag symbol has a circle around it. If I touch that circle, the icon changes. So now I can reposition, again, you're going to see it on the screen, I can reposition my stitch without altering the width of the stitch. So I can get it exactly where I want. So that's a little hidden gem there. So we're back to our menu of stitches here. Now down here, if I click on this, it's going to bring up these categories of stitches. This machine has hundreds of stitches built into it, so they built them into categories to try to simplify you getting to the stitch, so you're not having to page through hundreds and hundreds of stitches. So your first category here is utility stitches. When you click on number 2, that is your quilting stitches. Number 3 are your needle art stitches. Needle art stitches are stitches that look like you hand stitched them. Satin stitches. We have your decorative stitch menus, and I use the arrow over to bring up more menus. So now we have miscellaneous stitches. We have monogram stitches, which are beautiful. I'll show you those. Some specialty stitch techniques that are unique to Pfaff, and we will also play with some of these. Ribbon stitches are one, stacking stitches, floating stitches. These are really, really fun to play with. We have, again, another additional stitch category which has very unique stitches that work with some specialty attachments that you can do with the machine. And then we have our personal menu, and our personal menu is where we put our favorite stitches or stitches we created, which I'll go into in a little while, or altered in any way. We can save them into our personal menu. So in each of these categories, we have subcategories here. So when we're in utility stitches, we have essential stitches, overcast stitches, buttonholes, eyelets, and Bart tacks. So if we're in utility and we're going to do a buttonhole, we would click on our buttonhole menu, and then we would select the buttonhole that we want to do. So let's play around. Of course, we have our quilting stitches. We have some of our nice decorative stitches, leaves and flowers, art stitches, ornamental, maxi art. Maxi stitches are great. We'll get into those in a little while. So again, if I click on this, then some of these stitches come up. But you'll notice also we have an up and down arrow here, because if you do want to just scroll through all of our menus, you can just start clicking through and you can get to all of the beautiful stitches that that Pfaff does. And some of these stitches are just fantastic. I really love this spider. That's one of my personal favorites. You know what? Let's do that spider. That one's great. So you'll notice when I select the spider stitch, it goes beyond the width of the machine. That's because this machine can feed in multiple directions. So it can feed the fabric left to right and front to back, right? So it can move the fabric over to do these wider stitches. Now on the screen, when we're doing these wider stitches, it has a recommended foot. So the foot recommendations will always pop up on the screen. This is telling us that we should be using our number 8 foot, and the feet all have numbers on them. So it's important to make sure you're using the correct foot for the stitch that you're doing if you want the stitch to turn out the best. This recommends that we also stabilize the fabric. If it's a looser fabric especially, but if it's a really stiff fabric, sometimes you can get away with not stabilizing it. But because the fabric is moving in so many directions, it needs that stability to make the pattern turn out. So let's actually stitch out this and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so first we're gonna attach the proper foot. To take feet off of Pfaff, you just push down on the front of the foot and it pops off. And then I have to maneuver around the camera here. So then the new foot just pushes up and locks in just like that. And so this is our maxi stitch foot. So this allows the machine to feed in all of the different directions that the machine feeds in, and you'll see this done. So I'm gonna actually use the start stop button instead of the foot control to do this. So I'm just gonna hit the start stop. And now you can see the fabric moving left and right. And you'll notice I'm not holding the fabric at all. Pfaff has a really nice, superior feed system to most machines. So it feeds extremely straight and accurately. Let the camera focus for a second, but see how great that stitch is? One of my favorites. I don't know, it looks a little creepy. I like the spiders. I also want to show you just how great the stitch quality is on this machine. So we did a pretty involved decorative stitch, and usually when machines do decorative stitches, they look great on top, and then the underside's kind of ugly. Pfaff has such a high stitch quality that I don't know if you can see that. The underside still looks great. It doesn't pull away from the fabric. It looks a lot like the top side does. So really high stitch quality on the Pfaff machines. Okay, so let's get rid of the spider, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring up a satin stitch. So I wanna show you something kind of cool with the way satin stitches work on this machine. So we have some nice, we can do some satin stitches here. So we'll just pick this stitch. So this stitch comes in already set to 9 millimeters on the stitch width, and then the length of the pattern is 20.5 millimeters. This is another really smart thing that Pfaff does on their machines. Instead of telling you what the exact stitch length is, it's telling you how long the pattern is. So each of these pyramids here is 20.5 millimeters. This is a little bit easier for people to do their calculations if they need to. So it just makes more sense to tell you what the pattern length is. And of course, you can adjust that here, so you can watch them shrink up. And it'll only let you go so far, because of course you won't be able to do the pattern any longer if you go beyond its limits. So then, or you can elongate it. So now, what you're noticing too is that I'm not changing the stitch length. I'm elongating the pattern. And so this is unique too, because most machines, when you click longer, it's just going to increase the stitch length, which is going to spread the stitches apart, and it's no longer going to be a satin stitch. So Pfaff doesn't do that. Pfaff lets you elongate the pattern, keeping the exact same pattern density here. So that's a really great feature. But what if you're working with a specialty thread, maybe a really fat thread, like a 30 weight embroidery thread. And so now you go, okay, I need the stitch length to be a little bit spread apart. No problem. You'll notice there's a little circle in the middle of that icon. If you touch that circle, it has now changed over to be stitch length instead of the pattern elongator. So now we're set at a 0.4 stitch length, which is in millimeters, so 0.4 of a millimeter, very tight stitch. So if I elongate it, you're going to notice it looks different here on the screen. It is separating itself. You see that? So now you can change the density. And not only that, again, is you can see what's going on. This is actually what it's going to look like on the fabric. It's going to be a very loose stitched out pattern here. Actually, we'll stitch this out really quick. I always like to show people exactly how accurate that display is on, let me fold it maybe so you can see a little bit better, on the sizing. You see that? That's exactly what we got when we stitched it on the fabric. It takes all the guesswork out. Another thing I want to point out, this is another little hidden gem that is unique to Pfaff. Notice that this is a satin stitch. So notice how this satin stitch feeds. It feeds in a unique way. It is not just a squished up zigzag stitch. That's what most machines do. They take their zigzag stitch and they make it really tight together, and then you get a satin stitch. The downside to that is it doesn't feed as well, and so a lot of times it'll stop feeding and you'll get that little ball up where it's feeding in place. Also, it doesn't make as nice of a looking satin stitch. The way that Pfaff does is it does it more like a lightning bolt stitch. So it feeds over, stops feeding, stitches over, feeds, stop feeding, stitches over, feeds. So it only feeds on one side. So you can get a much tighter looking satin stitch with a little bit of a greater stitch length. So it makes the appearance really, really just nicer. Professional is what it looks like. So different than the way a lot of other machines do it. I think some companies have kind of copied this. They figured out this actually works really well. And now I notice this a little bit more common in the industry. Sewing machine companies love to see what other companies are doing right and try to figure out a way to make it work for them. So that is the pattern elongator and the stitch density there. So, and again, you'll notice here that automatic tensions went to 2.4. Why? Because Pfaff knows that this stitch works the best at 2.4. It turned the tensions down to give you that really nice, clean satin appearance. Also, too, if you notice down here at the bottom, we have some funny numbers, 4, 2, 4. You may have already figured out what this is. This is telling you the stitch location. So this stitch is in menu 4, and it's in the sub-menu 2, and it's stitch number 4. So if we go here, so we're in menu 4, sub-menu 2, and then it was stitch number 4. So 4, 2, 4. So that just tells you the stitch location. Okay, so we've been covering some of the basics. So now I want to show you one of my favorite things that a few sewing machine companies have done is put an instant help button on your display. So even though Pfaff's displays are very intuitive, it's really easy to kind of figure out what the display is for or how to navigate it, they have an extra little help tool. So you got the question mark. So if I hit the question mark, and now that question mark is active, so anything that I touch on the screen, it's going to pop up and tell me what that button is for. So that is where I free motion. If I touch this and I touch here, it says that's my thread tension, teaches me how to adjust it. This is my stitch length. So anything that I touch, it tells me this is my stitch menus. If I go over here, you know, why do I have a trash can? Trash can doesn't tell me. This is mirror imaging. So it kind of guides me completely through the machine. The cool thing too is if I'm in a stitch, let's go to, let's go to this stitch. If I touch the question mark and I touch a stitch, it tells me the name of the stitch and what the stitch is used for. So that question mark really guides you through the entire machine. It takes all of the guesswork kind of out of what the icons are. So that, to me, is one of the best tools that they added to the machine. I do not understand why every sewing machine company doesn't have this built into their machines, especially with a lot of the machines getting more complicated displays where their icons are trying to be made universal so that every country can see the same icon and kind of know what it is, but it can be very confusing at times. And so I don't understand why they don't have that little question mark built into every sewing machine. But Pfaff has it, so that's great. So now I'm going to bring up a straight stitch because I want to show you some of the cool automatic features that you can do when you're on a straight stitch. So, okay, so we're back to normal. So now over here we have these little icons here. The first one is automatic locking icons. So what I can do when I touch that, this little menu pops up. So I can select to have an automatic lock at the beginning. I can select to have an automatic lock at the end. And I can also select here to have it automatically cut. And I can do any variation of this. I can have it only lock the end and no cut, or only lock the beginning, but I'm going to turn on all three so that you can see exactly what's going to happen when I stitch this out. So I'm going to change the camera view so you can watch this. Okay, so now I have the automatic lock at the beginning, automatic lock at the end, and automatic cut selected. So I'm going to use my Start Stop button and get the machine sewing. So you'll notice that it's going to lock the beginning. So now I can sew as much as I want without it locking the end. It only locks the end when I tell it I'm ready for it to lock and finish the stitch for me. And I do that by touching the reverse button. So when I start sewing, the first thing it does is it locks the beginning. And so now I can start and stop as much as I want. See this? Now I'm using my foot control. But it won't do the finish until I touch the reverse. Now it's going to lock the end for me automatic, and it's going to cut, and it's going to raise the foot. So now I took care of my beginning locks and end locks. Now it knows now that I'm back at the beginning of my seam. So now when I start sewing, it's going to again lock the beginning for me, and then lock the end and raise my foot. So it's doing that all by turning on that selection on the screen. And again, anytime you turn something on, you know it's on because it's lit up green. So now I'm going to leave those three turned on for a moment, and I'm going to show you another thing you can do, which is called Patchwork. Patchwork is what Pfaff calls it, but it's remembering what you sewed, and it's going to repeat it. So now I like having those first three features turned on to automatically lock and cut when I show this feature, because it's almost like kind of getting into production work. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on this little icon, and if you forget again what that icon is, you can touch your question mark, and now it says Patchwork Program. Kind of helps you find things a little bit. So I'm going to turn on the patchwork here. So now that's on, and so what it's going to do here, I'm going to change the camera angle back so you can watch how it's going to remember what I sewed and repeat it. Okay, so now I'm going to sew, and it's going to automatically lock. It's going to sew my length. I'm going to touch my reverse. It's going to lock the end. Okay, so now it has remembered exactly what I sewed, and now all I have to do is hit my foot control, and it's going to do it. It's going to do it all automatically. So again, I'm not lifting the foot, I'm not hitting buttons, I'm not having to do anything but hit my foot control, and the machine's taking care of the rest. So if I had to do 50 pleats, or I had to do just the same thing over and over and over and over again, do it one time and let the machine take care of the rest. And you can see it's just perfectly repeating itself. So that is the Patchwork program in here. And so when you do it too, you can even double it. You can increase it. So if you go, okay, the first one I did was great, but it was one stitch off. I can go, okay, I need you to be another stitch. Or I need you to be another stitch. Or I need you to be another stitch. And now it's going to do that length and repeat it. So you can kind of fine tune it even after the fact. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off everything. So I'm going to turn off all these little green icons here, and I'm going to show you another really cool feature called mitered corners or tapered stitches. So basically on this machine, you could put mitered corners or tapered or angles on any of the stitches for the most part that the machine does outside of a straight stitch. Of course, there's nothing you can miter on a straight stitch, or the Maxi stitches. It won't do it on that, but it'll do it on all the other hundreds of stitches. So first, let's go find a nice wide stitch. I think there's one in here I like. Yes, I like this one, number 6. I like to show it off with this stitch because it's very uniform, so you get to really see well what's going on when we do this feature. So we're going to go back over to where we did the patchwork in here, and the default on this is 45 degrees. So if I click this, I get 45 degree at the beginning, and if I click this one, now I have it at the end of my stitch. So this is great for framing things out. So I will show you, I'm going to have to move the camera angle again, and I'll show you on the fabric what this looks like when it sews out. And I'll also show you how to tell it when to do the end taper. Okay, so when I start sewing this stitch, it's going to start with a miter until it gets to full width, and then it'll just continue with that full width until I'm ready for it to finish. So when I'm ready to do the end, I touch the reverse button, and then it does the end taper, and now it's stopped. When it's done, I have it set for needle down, so it's going to raise the foot for me automatically. So I'm going to rotate this fabric and start sewing so you can see how it does a nice mitered corner. So now it knows I'm back at the beginning, so it's going to start with the miter. Now I'll touch the reverse for it to finish. You see that? Very cool mitered stitch. Now you can do this with any of the stitches that the machine does, outside of, again, straight stitch and the Maxi stitches. But all of the hundreds of stitches, you can put these cool little miters on. So now let me show you some other angles that you work with besides the 45 degrees. So you'll notice here on our display, we've got the beginning and end miters here, but you'll notice there's a little triangle at the corner of the icon. And you'll see this kind of throughout the display in certain spots. What that means is that there is another menu hidden in that icon. So to access that menu, you hold down on the icon until the menu pops up. So now you can see on the menu how many other options we have. We have 30 degree, we have 60 degree in the middle, we have our 45 defaults, we have it coming from the other angle. So we're not going to go through all of these, but let's do 60 degree beginning. and we'll do 60° at the end. So again, you hold down on the icon until the menu pops up. And you can already see what's going to happen because you can see it, of course, on Pfaff's fantastic screen that lets you actually see what's going on with the stitch. But we're going to sew this off so you can see how great it looks. All right, so hit the foot control. It's going to start with the taper. And then when I'm ready to finish, I just touch the reverse button, and it's going to do the end taper. See that? So those you can do again with any stitches. Just a lot of fun little things hidden in the machine. And I just have to continue to show you guys how great the back of the stitches look. So that to me is super important, is this high stitch quality of the machine. It has to sew nice on the back and the front. And decorative stitches is the true test of a machine. So if you go and you go, okay, well, that straight stitch looks fine. Have them, do some decorative stitches and see what it looks like on the backside, because usually decorative stitches don't balance well at all in most machines. Okay, so now we're going to turn off our miters, and again, very easy. It's lit up green, so we know what to turn off. So we hit those off, and we just click on the box to close that window. So the next one down is programming. Programming is when you're combining stitches together. It's also what's used when you're writing a name, because of course this machine has alphabets, so it can write out a name. So, but before we get into the names, we will do some programming just with some fun decorative stitches. We'll find a few fun stitches to put together. So I touch the program button, opens up this kind of green screen. So we're going to go to our menu here. And we will just find some fun stitches to go together. Usually I have some stitches picked out ahead of time, but I don't in this case. So we'll just find a few things that we think look good. Oh, we can do, it's a great little sewing machine there. Oh, you know what? Maybe this sewing machine, which is a big maxi stitch. And then we'll put that with this little pin cushion. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. And so you've got some little fine tuning, tells you the length of your pattern, the width adjustments, that we have two designs up there, and we can kind of see between the two designs. Automatic locking stitches, if I wanted to cut automatically after all of those fun little things. So let's, I haven't tested this out, but let's see what it looks like when we stitch it out. Should be fun. We'll see if I have enough room on this piece of fabric. I like to utilize the whole thing. I'm thrifty that way. So let's start this off. I'm going to use my start stop button and get it going. Hopefully we don't run into our spiders. No, I think we're good. So anytime you're in this program or sequencing screen, you have options. I could just do the sewing machine and the pin cushion and have it stop, and I could have done that by touching the stop icon or the scissor icon, or I can have it do it as a continual order, so it can just keep repeating these patterns over and over and over again. Right now I have it just doing it as a continual order. Might run out of room on our fabric, maybe, we'll see. And I think too with Pfaff, if we run off our fabric a little bit, the machine doesn't tangle, it doesn't jam, it's usually just fine. See, we're off our fabric, it's not the end of the world, but I am going to stop it because there's no reason to sew off of our fabric. So you can see how we took these little guys. Let me try to get it so the camera can zoom on it well. So we got the sewing machine and the pin cushion, and so we put them together again in the sequencing screen, the programming screen. Okay, so now we're going to go on to Stitch Creator, which is one of my favorite features. It's so much fun to create your own stitches from scratch or to mess around with the stitches that are built into the machine. But really quick, before I do that, I forgot a couple little important icons to show you off to the right. They'll just take a second. So we've got these mirror image icons. So mirror imaging is when you're flip-flopping the stitch, and you can do it in multiple directions. So this is left and right. And again, you're seeing exactly what's happening on the screen. And then this is front to back. So we've got this way, or we've got this way, is basically what it is. So you can then really customize things quite a bit by flip-flopping them around to get it exactly kind of how you want it to be. So, okay, so that was our little sequencing icon. So the one down here below it, here, just looks like a few little plotted out stitches. This is Stitch Creator. So Stitch Creator, I'm going to show you all kinds of stuff you can do in Stitch Creator because I really, really love Stitch Creator. Stitch Creator is where you can make your own stitches from scratch. So you can start with a blank canvas like this, and I can start adding stitches and moving them around. Or we can take and bring in stitches that are built into the machine, and we can alter those stitches. So we're going to start there. We're going to bring in a stitch from the machine, and we're going to play around with it. And then after that, we will go and make a stitch from scratch. Okay, so let's go into our stitch menu, and we are going to pick a stitch. So let's pick this little guy right here. And you'll notice when it comes up on the screen, it looks different. It has every stitch is plotted out, and it's all highlighted in green right now. So right now, I'm actually not going to alter the stitch because I want to show you what it looks like when we sew it out normal. So I'm just going to stitch this out for a second, and then I'll hold it up and let you see what it looks like stitched out normally with no altering to the stitch. Okay, so that's what the stitch looks like. Very normal stitch. So now we're going to go back into Stitch Creator. And so now everything is still highlighted. So when it's highlighted in green, it means it's ready to be altered. So the one really neat feature I can do very quickly is I can triple the stitch. Because if I go and I look at this stitch and I said, this was a nice stitch. I like the way that this stitch looked. I just wish maybe it was a little bit bolder. So I can make the stitch bolder by tripling it. So every single stitch is now going to be 3 threads. So it's going to be tripled over. So let's stitch that out, and I can show you what that looks like. Okay, so now, how well you guys can see that, but now when you look at the stitch, same stitch, but we tripled it over and made it very nice and bold. So that is one really great feature. And again, you can play around with any of the stitches in the machine. Very quick and easy by doing that. Another thing we can do is we can unhighlight everything by touching this little icon right here. So now all of the green little boxes went away. And we can then scroll to certain sections. So let's say I only want the, I will call them the bows part of the design to be tripled, and I want the rest to be singled. So what I do is I've unhighlighted everything. So now I'm going to turn my highlighter back on, and then I'm going to select the part I want to alter. So now that's highlighted in green. Sorry. Highlight that, get back, okay. Let's do this again. Go in the wrong direction. Okay, I love live things. It's always a lot of fun. So now I highlighted that and I tripled it over. So now if I wanted just that tripled over, I can do that. Let's actually let's untriple that. Let's actually just triple the bow section in the middle. So now I'm going to turn on my highlighter, and I'm going to highlight just the bow section, and we are going to triple that over. Okay, good. Yeah, I love camera jitters. Those are always fun. And that's part of my process. I don't spend a lot of time practicing this stuff ahead of time. I don't go and like, oh, let's test all these features to see what looks best on camera. I'm just winging this. I love just to go through the machine naturally and just play with the stitches because I think, I'm so passionate about this machine that I think it comes through when it's a little bit more natural, a little bit more seamless. So that's why I don't practice this stuff ahead of time. So if it seems a little funny on film, that's why. So we have made the bow and we've highlighted just the bow section. So let me stitch this out now and I'll show you what this is going to look like. And again, I hit my cutter button. And when I'm sewing a pattern and you hit your cutter button, it waits till the pattern is finished. It locks automatically, cuts, and raises a foot. So now, if I look at my stitch, of course, you already know what's going to happen. Just that section is now highlighted in bold. So you can see how you can really take a single stitch that the machine does and customize it in so many different ways in Stitch Creator. But now let's start with a different stitch. So let's trash can this whole thing and get rid of it. So we've got this little trash can icon right here, and that's where it comes into play. If you hold down on the trash can icon, it'll ask you if you want to delete everything on the screen, which we do. So now everything is gone and we're back to a clean slate. If you hit it one time, it's kind of like we're gonna undo the last thing you did type of button, but holding it down wipes out everything. So now let's go back into here. We're going to select, I think this heart's a good one to do. So again, the heart comes in completely plotted out. So everything is highlighted so that you can alter the entire stitch at once if you want to, but we don't want to do that. So we're going to turn off our highlighter. I am going to say I like this pattern. It's cute, 3 hearts. I, for whatever reason, don't like the little middle heart. I want to get rid of that middle heart. So what we're going to do then is we're going to get to the point where we're going to start to highlight the middle heart. So I scrolled up from the bottom, turn on my highlighter, highlight that part of the stitch. If I go too far, yep, it's doubled over. So we're going to take away all of that. Okay, so now I've completely highlighted just that heart part, and I'm going to hit my trash can. My trash can has taken, sorry, I hit the camera, taken the heart completely away, and so now when I stitch it out, that heart won't exist on the fabric. So that's another thing you can do. You can take sections of the stitching away, or you can add sections of the stitching. Let's say you are in some organization like Masons and you go, I really wish they had this Masonic symbol in there. Well, you can go and you can make those symbols and you can put them in and do it in Stitch Creator. So let me show you that. So let's get clean slate here. We're going to get rid of everything. So now you can start to plot out your stitches from scratch. I've done numerous things in Stitch Creator this way. I've even taken the time to create my exact signature. I drew my signature on a piece of paper and then I copied it onto the screen, tripling over certain sections so that they're bolder, so it looked like I signed what I just created. That took a little bit of time, so we're not going to go through that today. We're going to do some simpler things. First, let's do something super random. So we're just going to get a stitch on the screen. I can drag it wherever I want. I'll put it there. I'll get another one. I'll move it here. We'll just do something very artsy-fartsy. This is not going to look like anything, but anyway, we're creating it. Okay. So now, let's see what that looks like. Again, it's probably going to look ridiculous, but it's our creation. So that's it on the screen. So there's our funny little stitch. But let's go back in there and let's delete everything. But if you wanted to take the time to make a certain symbol or something, whatever you want, you can do that in Stitch Creator. I like to make this certain stitch that looks like hand stitching. And I got the idea looking at one of my kids' stuffed animals. They had bought a little Kermit the Frog, and it had a certain stitching around the collar that was made to look like it was hand stitched, even though it wasn't. And so I looked at it and said, you know what, I can make something very similar in Stitch Creator. And I did, and it actually turned out pretty decently. So I'll show you how I did this, because this doesn't take very long. So I'm going to get a stitch on the screen, and I'm going to make it as long as possible, max stitch length. And if I need to fine tune, these are little fine tuners here. So sometimes it's hard to get things exactly straight by moving them on the screen yourself. So now I'm going to get another stitch, and I'm going to take that stitch back on top of the other stitch. And then I'm going to get another one, and I'm going to bring it down. And I'm going to get another one, and I'm going to do this. Depends on the thread that I'm working with. I might do this 8 times. A lot of times I think I go for 8. So right now I'm at 7 of 7, so I know that I have 7 stitches. So now I'm going to bring the 8th one down on top of it. So now it looks like one long stitch, but really it's 8 stitches on top of each other. So now I have to do my little tiny connector stitches. So I just kind of go close-ish. And I'll hit the repeat button. This is repeat, so it repeats the last thing I did. So now I got these 2 little tiny connector stitches on top of my 8 stitches. So now I'll show you what this looks like when I stitch this out. Well, you can see the stitch there on the fabric. I had a slight problem with my camera and I lost some of my video clips, but that's the stitch there, my hand-looking stitch. Okay, and so now we can see that kind of stitched out, went kind of over something else. And again, we make it one time and then we add it into our heart menu. Okay, so now let's get into some other fun things. Let's play around a little bit with free motion quilting. So for free motion quilting, let's start with the basics, which is a regular straight stitch. So we're going to go to our stitches, back to menu number 1, which again, when you turn the machine on at the beginning of the day, it's always on straight stitch. Doesn't matter what you did last time, so you don't have to worry about always navigating through those menus. It's just we're going all through the machine. So we're back to a regular straight stitch. So now this funny little icon right here with this squiggly little line is our free motion icon. It's supposed to show a little meandering free motion stitch. So to activate free motion on this machine, we are going to touch this icon. And now we get choices. And the reason why we have choices is there's multiple types of free motion feet that Pfaff works with. So the foot that comes with this machine for free motion is called the Sensormatic free motion foot. So that is the one we're going to select here. You'll hear a little thud when you select it because this machine automatically lowers the feed dogs for you. So the feed dogs have been lowered. So we're going to hit OK. We know it's activated because we have it's green. The little symbol's green, and we've got a funny little foot symbol. That foot symbol is this foot right here. This is our clear Sensormatic free motion foot. So we are going to pop on this foot, and I am going to show you how great this machine does with free motion. So we're going to be at a little bit of a funny angle because it's kind of hard to free motion when you're trying to sit to the side of the machine with the camera. So we are going to pop on our Sensormatic free motion foot first. So again, the feet just push down on the front of the foot to get the foot off. Now we're going to take this little tiny guy and we're just going to lift it right up and snap onto the machine. So now I recommend that people use a size 90 needle when they're doing their free motion quilting. I'm an advocate for that because it's a little bit of a stronger needle, and people who are learning how to free motion, a lot of times they'll bend their needles when they're learning because they're dragging their fabric around really aggressively. So what I will also do is I'm going to turn the speed down a little bit on the machine. So I'm hitting the speed button now and I'm setting it to a slightly lower speed. I like to free motion a little bit on the faster side. So now I have a black piece of fabric. I'm going to use my start stop button to start free motioning. And yes, I did not, pull up my stitch. That's something that you can definitely do. And that's what most quilters do. I'm just doing it the lazy way. But I love using the start stop button because it helps me keep my stitches very nice and uniform and even. And I'm a little bit of a basic quilter. I just like to do a simple meandering stitch. And I talked about how the start stop button works and how you don't have to unplug the foot control to use it. So now when I'm ready to stop, I'm just going to put my foot and touch my foot control. So now my foot control took back over and it stopped my stitch. So I don't know how well you can see that. This is the back side. Let the camera focus. I always love to show the back side of the stitch. So important. The stitch quality is really great on these machines. I have my do's and don'ts. I always tell people when they're doing free motion quilting, especially if you are a beginner at free motion quilting. Be reasonable on your thread size. Don't go to these giant heavy weighted cotton threads for free motion. Stick with a more of a standard weight cotton thread for free motion. The thicker the thread, the harder time you're gonna have with the machine to balance the stitch out. The more likely it's gonna pull hard on the needle, and maybe you're gonna bend your needles and skip stitches and do all these funny things. When you're beginning, if you start with a reasonable thread, you're gonna have an easier time. If you're a beginner, start with a 90 needle. You're gonna have an easier time. And if you're a beginner, run the machine slightly faster than you're comfortable with. That's my best advice right there. People who are beginning at free motion quilting are a little bit scared. They don't have their technique down very well, and so they're moving very jerky and slow, and they're more likely to cause their needle to bend when it's in the fabric. So if you run the machine a little bit faster, the needle's going to enter and leave the fabric at a pretty fast rate of speed, and you're less likely to bend your needle, because that's the biggest thing that people have trouble with when they're learning how to free motion is pulling too hard and bending that needle. So that is how great the machine does with its free motion. And again, all I had to do is turn it on by touching the icon on the screen, and the feed dogs dropped automatically. The presser foot went to the proper height, and I was off and running. So when I convert back to regular sewing, it is very fast and easy to go between free motion and regular sewing. So we're going to pop this foot off. We are going to stick our regular foot back on. I always like to turn on my walking foot, and then we'll go back to the screen and I'll show you what button to hit again. So now on the screen, you're going to touch the green little squiggly line, uncheck the box. Voila, you're back to regular sewing very simply. Okay, I want to show you how great the basting stitch is on the Pfaff for when you're basting your quilt. And the reason why I like to show this stitch is it's not that obvious on how this stitch works unless someone shows it to you in a class setting. But it is such a great feature. So I touch my stitch menu. It is stitch number 4. So when I hit stitch number 4, it doesn't look like anything on the screen. It can be very confusing. And when you hit the foot control, you'll go, what does this stitch does? This is basically, I call it a free motion basting stitch. You get to determine how long you want your base to be. So every time I hit the foot control, it'll do a little stitch, and then it'll stop, raise the foot, it'll turn the tensions off on the thread so that you can drag your fabric to whatever length you want, and then you hit your foot control again and it does the same thing over and over and over again, which I don't know if I'm explaining it that well, so I am going to show you how this works on the fabric. Okay, and so this, again, this is one of the great features of having the automatic foot that can hop up and down automatically for you. Because if I didn't have a foot that can do this, you would not be able to do this feature on this machine. So it's great. So you'll see how this works. So I hit my foot control, and it does a stitch and it raises the foot automatically. Now I drag and I hit my foot control and it stitches, and then I drag, I hit my foot control and it stitches. So now I can determine how long I want my base to be. I can have my base really short, like this, or I can have it, 3 feet long, however long I want it. So the reason why this is nice is because when you have a machine that the best you can do is make the stitch length as long as possible to do your basting stitch, your basting is going to be very close together. Also, your stitch is probably going to be a little bit too tight, and you're going to spend a lot more time ripping out your stitch with a seam ripper. Where what this machine does is it lets you do as many or as few as you want, and it has adjusted the tension of the machine to be able to pull the stitch out very easily. It also doesn't just do a normal stitch. It's a little kind of funny how it does this little jog thing. And so it holds just long enough for you to do what you need to do, but easy enough to pull it out. So then you can see how I have these big giant bases, because that's what I decided I want. And then I can very easily pull it out when I'm done. So this stitch, again, has to be demonstrated for you to get the full understanding of how wonderful that basting stitch is. But it's one of those things, I show this to people sometimes when I'm demonstrating the machine, and that's all they need to see and they're ready to buy, because it's such a cool feature in the machine. So now we should get into doing some buttonholes. I know not everybody does buttonholes. So if you don't do them, just skip ahead, but this machine does fantastic buttonholes. And I know we already covered free motion, but I just want to mention one other thing really quick. That's this whole off-the-cuff type of approach I do with making these videos, but you can free motion other stitches besides just straight stitch. Now, the only, in my mind, the only other practical one to free motion would be the zigzag stitch. Because if you free motion a zigzag stitch, you can almost do old-fashioned like monogramming type of embroidery looking stitches doing that. You could also do some kind of neat techniques where you put in a twin needle and then you do some free motion with a twin needle, and you can do that on the Pfaff with this Insurmatic foot. So now, so let's get into buttonholes. So we're going to go to our stitch menu, and we're going to pick our buttonholes, which is in menu number 1 and submenu number 3. And you got a lot of different buttonholes to choose from. And if you have a question on what the buttonhole should be used on, you can use your question mark, and then you can touch the buttonhole. And this one's a stretch buttonhole for stretch fabrics. So each buttonhole kind of has a different purpose for different types of fabric. It'll even tell you if you need to cord your buttonhole, which is kind of a special technique for certain tricky fabrics to do buttonholes on. Let's just do the regular run-of-the-mill buttonhole, which is number 1. So right now, I have not attached my buttonhole foot. So the machine is going to think that maybe I'm going to do this buttonhole kind of the old-fashioned way, not automatic. We are not going to do it that way. Yes, we can do it that way, but we're not. The only reason I would ever do a buttonhole not automatic is if I need some ridiculously long buttonhole for some weird thing I'm making, and maybe I needed it to be 6 inches long. Then you would do it on the manual setting. Otherwise, we do it with this fancy little gadget over here, which is the automatic buttonhole foot, which I'll change the camera angle and I will show you how this foot attaches. But first I'm actually going to leave it on the screen, because when I plug it in, the screen actually changes its settings because it knows I have it plugged in. So now that I've plugged it in, what we're going to see, the screen has changed. And this right here is the size of the buttonhole. So you can take your button and you can go, okay, what size buttonhole do I need for my button? You can hold it up to the screen and you can gauge it that way. You also, up on your little flip lid on the top of the machine, there is a ruler that reads in millimeters. So you can hold your button up to the ruler, and if I was to say with this presser foot, if I was to say this presser foot is a button, I would need a 21 millimeter buttonhole to match that. So then you can adjust the size. You can even you can adjust the width if you wanted to. We're going to leave it on normal. We can also adjust the density if we needed to. So if we felt like the buttonhole is just way too dense for the fabric that we're working on, we can do that also. You can also adjust the balancing of the buttonhole if for some reason the columns aren't meeting up or whatever. You can fine tune that, but that almost never do you ever have to touch that. So length and density and width is there, and of course the tensions are preset for you to do a beautiful buttonhole. So now that you saw how the screen works, I will show you how we attach this particular foot, and we'll do some buttonholes. Okay, so first, of course, we're going to take off our presser foot by pushing down on the front of the foot. It's going to pop off. We have our walking foot is off right now when we're doing a buttonhole. It is not needed. There is a little spot that you can feel with your finger that this headphone jack looking thing plugs into. Okay, there we go. I could have edited that out, but I'm just going to leave it. But yes, I'm sitting at a strange angle. So then we have our buttonhole foot here. So this is our buttonhole foot. It's going to attach very simply to the machine just by lifting up, and it snaps on. Sometimes too, I like to put the foot extra high up when I'm attaching the ankle extra high up when I'm attaching feet to it. Gives me a little bit room for my fat fingers, but you can do it however you want. So now this foot has a slider and it has this wheel in here, and it's a sensor that reads and measures the buttonholes. This red arrow is going to line up with the notch right there on the foot. That is the starting point for the buttonhole foot. So you always want to start there. All right, I like to use my start-stop button when I'm doing the buttonholes. So I just hit start. I'm gonna let the machine do it on its own. And so now, a lot of newer machines do buttonholes where they feed both columns in the same direction. That is a pretty big deal. Machines first started to do this a number of years ago, and it really transforms how nice the buttonholes are. You go from having buttonholes where the two columns look slightly different to buttonholes where it looks very professional. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is a very clean, crisp looking buttonhole. Let's play around with a few of the other little buttonholes too that the machine does, so you can see a little bit of the variety. So I'm going to go select. I always like this one. This one's actually for stretch fabrics. So both columns of the buttonholes are fed in the same direction on your standard buttonhole. This one on the stretch buttonhole does not do it that way. So that is my stretch buttonhole. Can you see that? So that is, it's called stretch buttonhole because it's for stretchy fabrics, and it'll have a lot of give to it, so the stitches won't distort too much when the fabric is being stretched or manipulated. And then of course we've got keyholes, and we've got all kinds of other fun little buttonholes. But that's basically how you do it. You're going to just make sure you line up the red arrow with the notch there, and make sure you have the foot plugged all the way up into the back right here. If you do not plug it in all the way, it will feed one column and not feed back around. So just make sure you get that up all the way. But beautiful, beautiful buttonholes. And if you're a Pfaffy from a long time ago, because there is such dedicated Pfaff people, you'll remember going back 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Pfaffs were great machines, but not so strong in the buttonhole department. And now, though, they have some of the best buttonholes in the entire industry. So very different. Okay, so now I want to show you this fun stitch technique in their specialty stitches. This one is called ribbon stitches. I really enjoy doing this one. It's a lot of fun. So we're going to go to our stitch menu. We're going to scroll over to our stitch techniques and we're going to select ribbon stitches. So now we got a lot of different choices, some really fancy involved ones that look like this one's beautiful. But we're gonna keep it simple because these can take a little while to do. And we're just gonna do number 5. So actually, let me go back here because I want to show you something. There is a little bit of a process to do these ribbon stitches because you're actually sewing with ribbon. And so it helps if you click your help button and then you touch the stitch. It's going to give you step-by-step instructions on how to actually sew this out. But once you've done it once or twice, it's pretty easy to figure out. So I will go over showing you how to do this. So you can see the basic outline of the stitch, but there's going to be ribbon involved, so it's going to look a little bit different. So I'm going to change the camera view so we can sew this out. Okay, so we made sure that we have our proper foot on. I'm going to do this with a little bit of batting. This is the fabric sample I had for free motion quilting, but it should turn out fine. So the first thing that we do is we sew and the machine will stop automatically. And it's good to note that we need to have our needle down selected. It's going to pivot the foot up and it's going to allow us to place our ribbon underneath there. So then you're going to push your ribbon. It sewed a stitch that was at it kind of sewed a straight little angled line. The ribbon's going to follow that angle and it's going to be pushed up against the needle. So once you get that done, then you start sewing and it's going to sew again and it's going to stop, and again it's going to stop, needle down, it's going to pivot the foot up. So you give the ribbon a little bit of a fold, you pull it again over until it's touching the needle following that angle. So then you do the same thing. You fold it over, get it under the foot until it touches the needle. Then you fold it again, go under the foot until it touches the needle. We'll do a few folds on this because this process takes a little bit, but it's worth it because it turns out so beautiful. And these specialty stitches that Pfaff does, these are uniquely Pfaff. So you will not see this type of technique with other machines. This is patented, owned by Pfaff. They developed it, and they have some really great stitch techniques, even beyond the ribbon stitches in this machine. Okay, I think that's good enough. So let's cut it, and I'll show you what it looks like. Get the camera angle right, focused. You see that? How cool that is with the ribbon? That is awesome. There is so many different ribbon techniques into the machine. There's one where you use 2 different ribbons and they weave them together. Ones that look like solid bands. I love the one that looks like, on these little points, it looks like little children sitting on the edges of the corner. Those are a lot of fun. So that's one of the very special stitches you'll find only in Pfaff. So then some of the other specialty stitches, we've got stacking stitches. Stacking stitches are really cool stitches that you sew one stitch out and then you start at the same starting point with another stitch and they layer on top of each other to give you this really cool effect. And you can do it with 2 different threads. And it really pops out. So really, really cool stacking stitches. That's a special technique. Floating stitches are very new with Pfaff. Very cool. We're not going to stitch one out, but really neat. They're a technique where the fabric is folded and then sewn and the tensions are adjusted in a way that when you open up the fabric, it looks like it was all hand sewn and you do not see any connection stitches. So they're floating because each one is its own separate thing with no connecting sewing stitches. So floating stitches are very, very cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed the class on the Pfaff Quilt Expression 720. Again, one of my favorite machines. I want to show you though one of my personal favorite add-ons. If you already own this machine, I think it's a must-have for any sewer. So this accessory trace, where all your feet and everything are stored front and back, it slides off and it exposes the free arm of the machine. Now this is a extension table made by Pfaff. It goes on, it matches the entire look of the machine, gives you a nice extra surface, it matches all the angles of the machine, it even has a little cutout here so you can take your bobbin cover on and off. It has a movable fabric guide, so then you can put it on either side of the needle if you want to line it up to do really perfect quarter-inch seams. You can adjust that, or it just pulls off and it comes right off of the machine. The great thing though with this table is there is no legs. I love that there's no legs. There's nothing to break off. There's nothing to go missing. There's no obstructions. It's very sturdy. It doesn't wobble around. It doesn't flex. It is perfectly designed for this machine, and they are not expensive. So if there was one add-on, that would be the add-on. So it's a great machine. Again, just to kind of go over some of the basic features. You know, you've got Pfaff's built-in walking foot. You've got the automatic presser foot lift features, automatic locking stitches with automatic cutting. You've got the tapered stitches where it'll put mitered corners on any of the stitches that it does. All of the stitch control, stitch creator, just such a fantastic machine. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I know they're kind of long and I go over a lot of stuff with the machines. But if you have any questions about the machine that you purchased from us, or if you're interested in purchasing it, just let us know. Thank you so much.